I'm pleased to have this opportunity to stand today and speak on the 6th report of the Standing Committee on Finance. I want to thank my colleagues for their work on this, the member for Skeena Bulkeley Valley, a hard-working MP full of energy and passion, and very, very devoted to this file, and really who does an amazing job back in his writing as well. The member for Rimouski Nejet, and this is where I could really mess it up, Temuscoata Levasque, and the member for Victoria. I also want to thank the witnesses who participated in this study. It's led to some important recommendations, and although we are pleased to support the report as a whole, we would be remiss not to focus in on some of the major challenges that youth in Canada are facing in today's labour market, points to which I do worry that my colleagues across the way are not paying enough mind. We've got the words, we need the actions. Mr. Speaker, since the Conservative government came to power, and over time it has become apparent that youth employment is not a priority for this government. As I door knock in my riding almost every weekend, and let me tell you, our youth are hurting. Young people in Surrey, their parents and grandparents, tell the same story, and I'm sure MPs from coast to coast are hearing similar stories, and it's our youth looking for work and parents and grandparents wanting them to have a decent paying job, so they're not helping to subsidize, and they want to see their children on their feet. As the official opposition critic for employment and social development, I'm deeply troubled when I meet youth who have good grades, who've studied hard, and who are passing out resumes left, right, and center, and yet they cannot get a job at all, or at least cannot get a decent hours, nor get decent pay. But to this day, as stated in the committee's main report, Canadian youth still suffer from the effects of the economic crisis. And Mr. Speaker, while employment growth for Canadians as a whole was not sufficient to recover lost jobs during the crisis, young people have been particularly affected. More than 455,000 jobs for people under 25 have been lost since before the recession, and the youth unemployment rate is now double that of the population aged 25 years and older. Mr. Speaker, as Amy Huziak from the Canadian Labour Congress said, recessions are always harder on younger workers, but we are nearly 5 years past the end of the last recession, and there is still no recovery in sight for young workers. There has not been any pickup with respect to the jobs for the cohort of 15 to 25, 4 years old in this country. And Mr. Speaker, it does not seem like we have missed an opportunity here to get youth back into the labour market. This is where we need to focus right now. Mr. Speaker, I and my New Democrat colleagues are deeply concerned by the current labour market situation for young Canadians, and we refuse to accept soaring levels of youth unemployment as normal. And it's not enough to say to our youth, just go and volunteer more and work for nothing. The federal government has a responsibility to help create jobs for young people. It requires collaborating with the provinces on training, apprenticeships, and education. Mr. Speaker, why isn't this government showing leadership and doing just that? And of course, Mr. Speaker, education is a major factor in social mobility. Just 2 hours ago, actually it's now more like 5 hours ago, I met with students from Kwantlen University and Vancouver Island University in my beautiful home province of British Columbia. And they are very concerned, Mr. Speaker. Youth are accepting unpaid internships in the hopes of eventually securing employment with that employer. But, Mr. Speaker, unpaid internships do not pay off student debt and do not allow young people to move forward out of their parents' homes, into homes of their own, to live modestly but independently. The pursuit of post-secondary education means that young people are able to increase their opportunities in the labour market, as well as their conditions of employment. But of course, an increasing number of students have trouble repaying their loans, and so many are deterred from furthering their education for fear it may result in insurmountable debt. And I think we've all heard stories of the growing debt that students leave their post-secondary institutions with. In many cases, I would say, Mr. Speaker, much higher than the price of the first house I bought when I graduated. Too many young workers are underemployed. The underemployment rate for youth was actually estimated at 27.7 last year. Mr. Speaker, there is also troubling gaps between the graduation rates of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal students, so we need to put in some programs to address these issues. The post-secondary graduation rate on reserves is about 14.4 compared to 39.1 for non-Aboriginal population. Even more troubling, Mr. Speaker, is that high school graduation rates are just 36.8 on reserves, compared with the 66.8 for the broader population. Mr. Speaker, the First Nations population is young and growing fast. Fully half of the population of 930,000 is under the age of 25, and as it stands, the majority of First Nations youth have not graduated high school. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, this government consistently underfunds First Nations education and schools. And in my previous life, I had the privilege to visit some of these communities and visit some of the schools, and I was so outraged at the standards of the buildings, which appeared to me more like what you would expect in third world countries rather than in a developed, wealthy nation like Canada. Then, Mr. Speaker, our youth face competition in the labour market from the growth of the temporary foreign worker program, which, as you know, under this government, they opened up the floodgates without too much regulation, and when they got caught, then they've tried to do a little bit of damage control. Temporary foreign workers admitted under the low-skilled occupation stream are actually competing directly with young people, and all year long, Mr. Speaker, case upon case upon case has been highlighted in the media from coast to coast to coast. We are all familiar with the infamous example of the McDonald's in Victoria, ignoring local students, not hiring them, giving them reduced hours in favour of paying lower wages to foreign workers. Heartbreakingly, this was one example of a countrywide crisis. Mr. Speaker, one of the issues brought forward in the material provided by the students who came to see me earlier this afternoon is that of data, or rather the lack of it. There is a serious data shortage in Canada right now, and as I've said tongue-in-cheek many times in this House, it is as if this government is allergic to data and evidence-based decision-making. They don't seem to want to have that kind of information to get in the way of their own agenda. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to spend a little bit of time expressing my particular support for recommendation 9 of this report, that the federal government collect data on unpaid internships in Canada and work with the provinces and territories to ensure the appropriate protections under relevant labour codes. Moreover, the government should study the impact of unpaid internships. You know, Mr. Speaker, I grew up in England, and, through our school, we were encouraged to volunteer and to get involved in the community. And, we did Meals on Wheels. I would go and read at a local hospital, and, got involved with the Duke of Edinburgh program. So we did a variety of volunteer work, but that was on the side. That was on the side. Surely we shouldn't be expecting our young people who have qualified, finished their university, have a huge debt load, and then saying, you need about a year's worth of experience, let's have you go and work for nothing for a year somewhere. We really have to pay some attention, and I think we don't have enough data even to begin to understand how serious this situation is, so that data collection becomes important. Mr. Speaker, logic alone suggests that if you are doing a job and not being paid for it, you are not going to have money. It means you're not being paid. And if you are devoting your time to an unpaid internship in the hopes of gaining experience that will lead to eventual employment, you do not then also have time to work an interim job to earn a meagre salary, perhaps even just enough to pay the interest on your student loans. And this is the conundrum for many young people right now. But, Mr. Speaker, without data, we aren't able to assess just how bad the situation actually is We can merely speculate and go on the stories we hear. And speculation does not good policy make, nor does guesswork. Furthermore, we need to find out what is actually resulting from unpaid internships. Are youth ultimately gaining? Are our youth being exploited? Do they do the year and then the employer looks for another freebie for another year? So all of that information needs to be gathered. Mr. Speaker, in order to work effectively at the federal level and with the provinces to remedy this problem, we need to know the exact size of the problem so that we can deduce the size of the solution needed. Make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, I and my NDP colleagues agree that there are good internship programs associated with academic institutions that help young Canadians benefit from a first work experience. And we have many co-op programs, and ones that will be relevant to and even improve their career prospect and are a part of their learning package. But the increasingly frequent use of unpaid internships by employers also poses a particular challenge for young Canadians, and it is the data associated with that challenge that we desperately need to analyze. Unfortunately, some employers do not use unpaid internships as a prerequisite to employment and as a way to fill positions that would otherwise be paid. So for them, it's just a revolving door. And they do not necessarily lead to the acquisition of relevant experience for the career of a young worker. Sometimes what they end up doing has very little to do with their expertise or with their background. Amendments to the Canada Labour Code could ensure better working conditions for our young people and protect them from exploitation. Next, Mr. Speaker, I want to emphasize the importance of Recommendation 16 of the report, that the federal government explore ways to promote youth hiring in Canada, such as, NDP has been suggesting this, tax credits for businesses that hire Canadians aged 18 to 30. That is a positive step the government could take tomorrow. They're really fond of making announcements in all kinds of locations. Here is one they should make, and stand up here and make it today or make it tomorrow, but here is one that will actually benefit our youth. Mr. Speaker, a youth hiring tax credit is a practical step to creating new jobs for young people. I have spoken to business people in Surrey and on the Surrey Board of Trade, and they agree that that kind of a policy is a win-win. New Democrats have proposed a $1,000 incentive that would be available to businesses that hire young Canadians aged 18 to 25. That credit would double in areas of dire unemployment. Businesses would also be able to access matching federal funds to help train their newly hired employees. Mr. Speaker, the time is now. Let's do this and show today's young people that we are paying attention and that we are not leaving them behind. By ignoring youth unemployment, or only paying lip service to it, Mr. Speaker, this government is actually threatening Canada's long-term economic prosperity. Mr. Speaker, you may be aware that Germany has just announced a few months ago that all post-secondary education fees in Germany are now waived. No matter what program you take for post-secondary, there are no fees over in Germany. And you know what? They're not just doing it because they woke up one day and said, oh, we need a new announcement. They did their research. They looked at how much common sense it made to do that and how investment in the youth is really about the future, and that that country is willing to make those sacrifices, and there are other like it, and they can see the economic and social benefits. If the government doesn't act now in Canada, we risk becoming the first generation in history to leave less to our children than we inherited from our parents. As a mother and a grandmother, I cannot tell you how much that breaks my heart. I always tell people that I do what I do because I want a better world for my grandchildren, the students I've taught over the years, and all young people in this country. I want to give them that promise of hope and of engagement. But right now, many youth are feeling disenchanted. Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve better. Canadians deserve smart investment in today's youth and tomorrow's economy. New Democrats recognize that smaller enterprises are the job-creating backbone of Canada's economy. In that vein, we've launched a Canada-wide campaign to engage small businesses, We're talking to business owners about practical ideas to help them expand, and the feedback we are getting is very, very positive. Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss not to discuss the fact that youth with disabilities face particular challenges in the labour market. They face a more difficult transition from school to work, reduced support services to meet their individual needs, job opportunities, and ignorance of their actual capabilities. Youth with disabilities are more educated than ever. However, as indicated by one witness, the employment rate of youth with disabilities in Canada was 45.7% in 2011. Mr. Speaker, when I learned that, I was shocked. This government must take action immediately to enable young people with disabilities to benefit from better opportunities to enter the labour market permanently. Lastly, and very dear to my heart, Mr. Speaker, I recently learned that 60% of students will postpone buying a house because of their debt, and 40% will postpone their plan to start a family. This highlights another issue of pressing importance for young professionals, the work-family balance. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will state again in this House, and as many times as I'm possibly able, that a national childcare system is vital for women to enter the labour force when their children are younger. When a woman first starts out in the labour force from the 25 to 29-year-old range, the gap isn't very large. It's after a few years. It's after a few years when they've had to take leave to care for young children that the gap grows and women hit that glass ceiling. But they also hit many other barriers, and they end up having to make very, very difficult choices, Mr. Speaker, choices that not only impact their career aspirations but also impact the economic base for families. Improving the childcare system in this country is fundamental to improving employment opportunities for both men and women. And if we are going to tackle poverty in a serious way and to tackle the growing gap between the rich and poor, one of the key pillars in that platform to do that is a universal, accessible, affordable, regulated childcare system, Mr. Speaker, and that's what the NDP stands for. Mr. Speaker, how much longer do I have? Oh, 2 minutes. How time flies when you're having fun. So I also want to, when we're talking about youth unemployment, I should say, Mr. Speaker, recently when I was at Kwantlen College and I met with a group of students, they told me that their challenges are the high cost. Education is incredibly expensive these days. But they're willing to actually take on that burden. But the difficulty is that once they leave those institutions, it can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years before they can get a full-time job in the field that they have qualified in. And that just doesn't seem right, Mr. Speaker. And I think that's the kind of thing we need to address. And I will tell you that in my riding of Newton North Delta in Surrey there, I talk to my constituents and all the time, and the number one issue, I should say, there are top 3 issues in my riding, but in the top 3, education, youth unemployment are integral part of that. Honestly, Mr. Speaker, the lack of a national childcare system in Canada right now is a market failure. Mr. Speaker, we need affordable, accessible, safe childcare in this country, and we need it now. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, and I know you support this, the leader of the official opposition has said that we're only one election away from having childcare that will be no more than $15 a day per child. And you know, Mr. Speaker, that's music to the ears of people right across this country from coast to coast to coast. Mr. Speaker, I want to say again how happy I am to have had the opportunity to speak to this report today. I thank my colleagues for their good work, and I look forward to seeing these recommendations come to fruition. And I would like to end with an appeal. Words on paper are meaningless. Let's have action.